So this Lent, we are talking about a sermon series, which is going through the next 40 days talking about burdens. And so you all have this card here which talks about the threefold ways that we'll be kind of owning what we carry, releasing them to the Lord, and then recognizing how we share that together in a supportive kind of way. For a lot of you who think about Lent, you may think this is the next 40 days of giving up chocolate that you don't like very much. What my hope is in this series is that it will help you to experience Lent the way I have for the past 25 years, where it's not just about fasting. It is about how we are growing in a deeper relationship with the Lord with intentional spiritual practices. And I think these 40 days offer us a real opportunity in our lives that are so busy and so hectic and so full of distractions to really take a moment to step back and say, how is it with my soul? How is it with my soul? And to take God's hand in this journey and know that you don't walk it alone, right? And so as we go through this season of Lent with some intentionality, we're going to be talking each week about burdens. Some burdens, the things that kind of weigh us down. Think about it as a boundary or a hindrance in your relationship with God, and kind of how we break that down with our intentional spiritual practices and open ourselves up in a new way of relationship to the Lord. So we know that at the end is good news, right? We know that Easter Sunday is at the end of these 40 days of Lent. And so each day when you leave on Sunday worship, I hope that you will leave feeling refreshed and revived and renewed in a way where you know the love of God more deeply in your life. And so today, our burden that we're talking about is the ego. The burden of the ego. And the I am statements are the perfect thing to talk about with this, because ego, as we know, is basically I. It is our I statements. And you've probably heard of words like egotistical or egocentric, right? Those are kind of extremes of the ego. So an egocentric person is a person who kind of sees everything in the world revolving around their center, right? That you might think about people's perspectives that are different than yours and think, oh, that's wrong, or I don't like that, or I don't appreciate that, or that your priorities are the most important priorities. And the way this is a boundary to God is that if we're saying that our way of thinking is the only way of thinking, well, it certainly doesn't open us up to what the mystery of God is about in our life, right? If we limit our thinking just to what we know or we understand or what our experience is or our perspectives, we can't open ourselves up to the way that God is mysteriously at work in our lives. Or similarly, if you are egotistical, an egotistical person is a person who thinks of themselves more highly than they ought, right? That their way is the best way, or they kind of have what we would say, an inflated sense of their self and their worth, right? And we've all known people like this. And most of the time, people who are like this actually have a lower self-confidence rather than a higher self-confidence. But it has to do with relationship with God. If you are making an idol out of yourself, of thinking of yourself more highly than you ought, then you're in the wrong place of the order of the hierarchy of God, right? You've got to have God first and self second. And so how the ego kind of gets in the way of that boundary of letting God be in control of your life rather than you being in control of your life. Similarly, if we think about just the word egoistic, which is where a lot of us are, you can't get away from being egoistic. Egoistic is just who we are as human beings. It is our I am. It's our I am of saying, I am a mother. I am a friend. I am a daughter. but it's also the way we take all of our experiences, all of our life stories, all of our beliefs, all of our ideas, and how that's packaged into who we are. And so if we think about who we are as our egoism and how that connects with our relationship with God, it's important to recognize in a self-reflective way what is ours and what is God's, so that we can be open and self-reflective in a way that allows us that connection with God in a transformational way. Otherwise, we just kind of go through life thinking that, our beliefs, our experiences, our ideas are really the only way. It doesn't allow for transformation. And so we've got this great passage from John, this I am the vine, which I think is a lovely image of how we think about the ego and our relationship with God. So this understanding of I am the vine, as Jesus says, and my Father is the vine grower, not only helps us understand the relationship of God as source of all power, but how it is that Jesus is the vine. A lot of times in our ego, we think we're the vine, right? Like we're the vine and God's just helping us grow. No, 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 no. God is doing the growth and Jesus is the vine. We're the branches, right? We're the branches. And it connects so nicely with the way that the Hebrew talks about in the creation story when we were first beginning. When it says that God gave us dominion over the earth, that Hebrew word dominion actually means higher on the root of a plant. Higher on the root of a plant. We're not the root, we're not the plant. We're just a little bit higher up on the root of a plant. Kind of gives us where our place in the scheme of God's growth in us is. There is a dependency there. There is a need for God. There is a need to be connected with that source. And if we think we're the vine, like we don't really need anybody. Or even if we're the roots, we don't need anybody. But no, we're the branches. And what's so interesting about a vine, and I am not a horticulturalist, but what's so interesting about a vine is that you have to plant and keep a vine pruned for 4 years before it starts to bear fruit. Isn't that interesting? That the pruning part of the vine is what allows it growth. And so as we think about kind of Lent and how we're kind of pruning our egos, pruning our egos for allowing that growth to happen, I think that image is so vital of thinking of how is our ego getting in the way of our growth with the Lord and our understanding our full reliance on the saving grace of God. There's a beautiful Native American proverb that says, even the wisest tree does not fight among its own branches. Right? Even the wisest tree does not fight among its own branches. And I think so often we see our branches getting in the way of each other, whether it's in our relationships or even within ourselves, that kind of infighting that we do either internally or with others when our ego gets in the way. And so how can we prune that back? Well, one of the things that I have been listening for is this idea of walking along life without judgment. You think about the amount of judgments that you make every day, right? Like today I was driving into work and there was this guy at a stoplight and he was revving his engine. And I thought, well, he's trying to get home in a hurry. I wonder what he's done wrong, right? He's going to get in trouble for it because it's so early on a Sunday morning. Well, that's a horrible thing to think, right? That's a horrible thing to be like, I don't know this guy. What? But these are the kinds of things that pop into our minds, right? And instead of, so like all honesty, confession here, like you're like, wow, you're a horrible person, Alex. but just this kind of this automatic go-to place that we put our assumptions on other people. And instead of that judgment, what would it look like to walk through the world with curiosity? To walk with the world instead of judgment with curiosity. I'm curious where he's going, and he's in such a hurry. Curiosity doesn't expect anything in return. It doesn't expect an end result. It's inquisitive, right? It wants you to get to know more in a way that's open, that's helpful, that's learning, that's engaged. And so I wonder what it would like to walk through our relationships with kind of that sense of curiosity. I'm curious why my spouse is behaving that way. I wonder what that is about for him. I wonder how I can be engaged in that. I wonder why my life is turning out the way it is. I'm curious about the steps that have led to the place where I am now. I wonder how God will be at work for the next thing. I'm curious about why my health is suffering right now, and how it is that there are so many people in my life who are coming into it, and what that means for me. I wonder what my future looks like in a way where I'm sure God is at work in it. You see how curiosity takes the ego out of judgment, right? To walk through the world with the sense of engagement as to what the next thing is about, rather than trying to control or judge what it should be. And so the reason I was kind of reflecting on this is this idea of these rocks that we're using to symbolize our Lenten journey. Because rocks are pretty solid, right? Rocks are pretty solid and hard. And rocks have a way of we look at them as stable, but then I was thinking about an image of a coastline and cliffs with the waves crashing up against the coast. And I was thinking about this idea of water as so fluid that actually gets into the pores of rocks, doesn't it? Gets into the pores of rocks, and really those rocks don't stand a chance at that water over the course of time with patience. Patiently waiting for that water to infiltrate those rocks, those burdens, those boundaries in our lives. Waiting for that fluidity of that water that can get through anything and break it down. So how are the waters of our baptism? The waters where we hear the words, "You are beloved. In you I am well pleased," from God. How are the waters of that baptism coming in as a life force, breaking down those burdens, allowing us to release and to be dependent upon God as the grower of all good things in our lives? It is that truth that I hope we can live into, recognizing that we are who we are, but God is who God is. I am the vine, you are the branches. And as we hear these words, may that ego that's in every single one of us start to find its true source of life, new life in Jesus Christ. Amen.